Is there any game in recent memory that's had more interesting discussions surrounding its release than Pokemon Sword and Shield? Yes, it's called Death Stranding. You can drink Monster Energy in that game. You can do a little pee-pee off the side of cliffs, and you've got a baby in a jar. It's crazy. But are there two games in recent memory that have had more interesting discussions surrounding their release than Pokemon Sword and Shield? If I looked into it enough, yeah, probably. But for the sake of this intro, no. Absolutely not. What a ridiculous assertion. Pokemon Sword and Shield are often abbreviated to swoosh, which coincidentally enough is almost the exact sound that my copy of Pokemon Sun made shortly after I slam dunked it into the murky waters of my downstairs toilet. And shortly before I finally let loose upon it the golden stream of happiness that I'd been saving up over the past 2 days, purely for the sole purpose of finally having my revenge on this game. You're an awful piece of excrement, and no one will miss you. It's no secret by now that I've very much disliked Generation 7 of Pokemon. I've done pretty big half an hour or so videos covering each of the last 3 generations, which you should check out. They have a lot less urine jokes. I said in my Sun and Moon video about a week or so before Sword and Shield were actually officially announced that I expected that Game Freak would double down on the design philosophy that they use for Sun and Moon, as in an extremely hand-holdy linear game that completely stripped away your freedom and insulted your intelligence at about every turn, in my opinion. Also, when I revealed that I was going to be covering Sword and Shield towards the end of the Black and White video, I said that I had very little faith in these games, which was true. A lot of the things that were being shown off at that time were leading me to believe that this game would just be more of 7th gen. And Sword and Shield are certainly very divisive games. People had opinions on these games before they even came out. Some people had even played the games all the way through before they came out. How did they do that? Are they from the future? Before we get into it and I start properly talking about these games, the one thing I want to say is the same thing that I say at the start of basically all of my Pokemon videos, and that's that this is not a review and I'm not trying to be objective. I'm just a lifelong fan who started with Gold, Silver and Crystal when I was a little kid. This is just the opinion of one guy who has a writing degree and is currently studying a master's degree of game design and theory, just saying. I'm not going to tirelessly talk about and try and rate every single aspect and feature of this game. There are some things that just don't affect my opinion in any way, so I'm just going to ignore them. Conversely, I might nitpick quite a bit. It's all subjective here, but also very well informed. Previously, I've talked about all the things that I liked about a Pokemon game first, so that I could get them out of the way and then talk about all the things that I disliked. I've also done the complete opposite. I've not even categorized them in the Black and White video because my feelings on those games were very complicated and I wasn't sure how to format them. And for the sake of maintaining suspense in this video, we're going to go back and forth. We'll go good, bad, so on and so forth. But you'll probably figure out how I feel about these games after long enough anyway, so it's been a long time coming. Here's the verdict on Pokemon Sword and Shield. If you're looking for the short version, then here it is. Pokemon Sword and Shield are by far the least polished Pokemon games ever released. In an objective sense, probably the worst Pokemon games ever released for a number of factors. And yet, almost to my own dismay, I found myself really quite enjoying them. There are quite a few problems here, yes, there's things that are deserving of criticism, but at the same time, there's quite a lot of little design choices and decisions made in this game that I worry might go without getting the credit they deserve. Before we get into labeling things good or bad, let's address the weirdly mono steel that looks like it should definitely at least be part fire type elephant in the room, the National Dex. Ever since it was confirmed that not every currently existing Pokemon would be returning in Sword and Shield, the games have been mired in controversy. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I was pretty much completely ambivalent towards the whole thing. I really just didn't care that much. And this is for a few reasons. One, because I kind of always saw it coming. I figured, you know, a lot of Pokemon get added every single generation. We would eventually get to the point where we couldn't really fit them all in the same game. And I don't know if that's exactly the case here and it wasn't even possible to fit them in the first place. I don't think that is the case, and that might be part of what made people so angry about it. But regardless, I just kind of saw it coming. I'm not concerned with which Pokemon are in the game so much as I'm concerned with the design and balance of the game, because the way I see it, if the design and balance is on point, then you can get attached to almost any Pokemon. If I were to speculate, I'd say that maybe this is part of the issue. Generations 6 and 7 were so easy that you were never really presented with anything remotely resembling a challenge, and as a result, never really got attached to your Pokemon because you didn't have any stories to tell or any special moments in a battle where one of them came through for you. Those are the classic moments. In my opinion, that is what Pokemon is made of. But the other thing is, and people might hate me for this, but it's kind of refreshing to see some of them just go away for a while, especially as a semi-competitive player myself. I don't play competitive a lot, but I dabble, and I'm aware of some Pokemon who have effectively terrorized the metagame from the moment they were introduced. Some as early as Generation 2 and 3, right? Some Pokemon have terrorized competitive play for upwards of 10 years at this rate. I'm talking about Salamence, Garchomp, Landorus Therian form. He hasn't been around for 10 years, but he is still a massive dickhead. While it initially may have upset a lot of people to see Pokemon like this go, I can assure you it might not be as bad a thing as you think for a lot of people. On top of everything else that I think it did wrong, Sun and Moon, in my opinion, had a very uninteresting competitive meta because the power creep was so ridiculous that so many Pokemon were completely pushed out of any sense of potential viability. So while it may come as a surprise, I think losing all of these Pokemon can actually be a good thing in quite a few ways. I think the competitive future of this game looks pretty bright and the metagame is looking to be more fresh than it's been in years. That is exciting to me. I might get into competitive more than I ever have before. So that's one of many reasons that I really wasn't too fussed about the national decks, or the lack thereof. With that out of the way, it's time to address the other weirdly mono steel that definitely looks like it should at least be part fire type elephant in the room. And that is the biggest criticism that I've had for both Generations 6 and 7, the experience share. When it was first revealed that the experience in this game would work more akin to a traditional JRPG with the entire party gaining experience from every battle, I was skeptical to say the least. That's a little play on skeptical and septile, you know. I mean, that was basically what they'd been doing for the past few generations, so I didn't really see the difference, but now I see what the difference is. The entire party is not gaining equal experience. And so, if you're wondering how I feel about this, well, this is the start of the good section. I was very concerned that the experience system would be as wacky as it had been for the last couple of generations, and I would breeze through the whole game with no problem whatsoever, being hugely overleveled for the vast majority of it. And I am so surprised and so relieved to say that that was in fact not the case at all. Now, it's not a perfect system, but it's still a huge step up from the way that the experience share has functioned in the last 2 generations. Experience and leveling and difficulty actually feels balanced in this game, and I mean, oh hallelujah, it feels like it's been so long, but there is actual drama in this game, there is actual challenge, and a good level of challenge as well. The game never gets too hard to the point where it's frustrating, but it's never so easy that it's completely brainless like the past 2 generations have been. It's really surprisingly well balanced, and I'm shocked that I'm saying that, to be honest. The game is a pretty good level of difficulty, not the whole way through, but I will say for quite a lot of it. Gym leaders are actually quite tough. I whited out against a few of them, and that was refreshing. It was a challenge, it was fun. I went through stuff with my party. I got attached to my Pokemon because some of them got me out of really tense situations. Leon, if you ask me, is an amazing final battle, maybe the new best one in the series. He's overleveled by the time you get to him, but in some kind of beautiful twist, that was the only time I had to grind for the actual champion fight, and that is perfect. Beautiful. I love it. If you haven't played the previous Pokemon games and don't know how the experience share has functioned before, or you haven't seen any of my previous Pokemon videos, which I recommend by the way, then let me give you a quick recap to illustrate why this point is so important. The Generation 3 through 5 experience share was like watching a wise old Kung Fu master practicing his techniques on a training dummy, and slowly becoming acclimated to using those techniques yourself over time. The Generation 6 and 7 experience share was more like if your cousin bumped into an old war veteran on the street and then suddenly your nan knew how to take apart a Swiss Army knife. Generation 8's experience system very elegantly made it so that I never had to grind apart from for the final boss, and that I very rarely ever breezed through the game completely mindlessly. There is a caveat to this, and that's that I think not even having the option to turn it off is outright stupid. I mean, come on, how hard is that to code into the game? Why are players just outright not given the option to make the game any harder for themselves? I think think that's pretty unjustifiable. But still, I think in general, the revamping of the experience system is the biggest piece of praise that I can give to Sword and Shield. Now let's talk about my biggest problem with the game. So in the transition from Generation 7 to Generation 8, we lost most of the hand-holding, not all of it, but most of it. We lost most of the complete lack of difficulty, but unfortunately we have not lost the linearity. I've said before that linearity in and of itself is not a problem, and I stand by that, but here's the thing. Most games that are linear in the way that Pokemon Sword and Shield is linear are linear because they have complex, deep, and interesting stories that they need to tell you. Games like Okami and The Last of Us that I talked about before, these games don't want you straying too far off the beaten path because they have a story to tell you, and that story is important. And even then, especially in the case of Okami, they still let you do a little bit of exploration and traversing the world on your own. Sword and Shield's story is not deep, complex, or interesting enough to justify how much it is boxing you into small areas with no opportunity to explore. Almost every single time you make it to a new major town, city, or location in this game, you're there, like you're stuck there. You have to do everything you can do there to satisfy the story before you can move on. Your paths out of that location are going to be blocked off in basically every direction apart from back. At no point can you ever journey ahead to the next route or town ahead of time and have your own little adventure. For a large portion of the game, you're getting strung along constantly by the game's other side characters with these kind of minor, uninteresting story beats that are forcing you into these locations and keeping you there. And while I don't like it and I don't agree with it, I can at least understand in those scenarios why they're forcing you to stay in these areas and do these things, because there are story beats. They're not interesting, complex, or deep enough to justify boxing you in, like I say, but they do exist, and clearly the game wants you to see these things and not stray too far. But what about those scenarios where the thing pointing you to your next destination is actually very loose? For example, when you make it to Hammerlock for the first time, and when you go to leave, your objective is simply to go to Stow-on-Side and challenge the gym there. So why couldn't the game open up here? I mean, the exit to the right of the city is predictably blocked off by Team Yell, so you can only go to the left, go across this one route, and then make it to Stow-on-Side, challenge the gym. You can't progress any further past Stow-on-Side either, and I'll get to that in a minute. I just don't see why I couldn't go to the right and possibly do a bit of exploration. Yes, the trainers and wild Pokemon there would be vastly over-leveled, but guess how we got to Hammerlock? We travelled across the wild area. With 3 gym badges, I accidentally stumbled into a level 60 Tyranitar. What are you trying to protect me from? What is there on this route that is worse than anything I could bump into in the wild area? And then again, when you make it to Stow-on-Side, there is a pathway into Glimwood Tangle, but again, it's blocked off by Team Yell. And here's the thing, that pathway obviously doesn't open up until you beat the gym in Stow-on-Side and have basically done the only thing there of note. But why can't I just go into Glimwood Tangle and at least get to Badonlea before I do the 4th gym? I mean, the difference between the 4th gym and the 5th gym isn't even as radical as Hammerlock and that one route I was talking about earlier. There's one story event that happens between the 4th and 5th gym, and that's when Bede gets his challenger status revoked or whatever it is. That could still happen after you beat the 4th gym. Maybe I could just go ahead to Badonlea of my own accord and maybe beat the 5th gym first. Nothing really happens after that, does it? There's nothing in Glimwood Tangle or Badonlea that is as scary as anything I could accidentally bump into in the wild area, like I say. So I don't know why the game constantly feels the need to box you in and protect you. The thing is that Pokemon games have done non-linearity like this pretty well before. Think of Generation 2. When you make it to Ekritique City, the world opens up to you quite a lot. You can travel really far to the left and make it all the way to Olivine City, where the 6th gym leader is. She's not there at the time, and that's fine, because at least I managed to make it to the city and have a cool little experience where I found something on my own. You can go inside the Burn Tower and check that out, and then as soon as you can finally use Surf after beating Morty, you could head the way that the game wants you to and go straight to Cianwood City and challenge for the 5th gym badge, but you can now also go almost all the way to the right and make it to Mahogany Town, where the 7th gym is. You can get the 7th gym badge before you even fight Chuck or Jasmine, the 5th and 6th gym leaders respectively. That's so cool. Generation 3 does a similar thing. You can go to Slateport City and do a lot of the things of note there before you even fight the 2nd gym leader who's in the town before that. And then when you get to Moorville City, things open up again a little bit. You could just go and fight Watson and do the 3rd gym, but you can also go to the left and do a whole route and find a whole new town called Verdumturf Town. And do you remember Pacific-Log Town? I'm not totally sure, but I'm pretty sure that at least in the original Ruby and Sapphire, this was a town that you could hypothetically complete the whole game without ever visiting. It might might have changed in Emerald because Rayquaza's in the Sky Pillar, which is nearby. I can't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I believe this is a non-compulsory town, and it's just kind of a discovery, right? When you first stumble upon Pacific Log Town, it feels amazing because it's so tucked away from everything else and quite hard to get to and hard to find. And finding this whole new, pretty secretive area is really, really cool. This is the kind of thing that Pokemon Sword and Shield is missing, and in my opinion, this is the kind of thing that Pokemon has been missing for a while now. This sense of a cohesive, open world, a sense of genuine exploration, and not constantly being boxed off and forced into small areas. There's no town in Sword and Shield that is non-compulsory. You'll go everywhere and basically do everything the game wants you to do. I said earlier that most of the hand-holding was gone, and that's true because a lot of tutorials are gone, and a lot of the NPCs just kind of talking down to you like you've never played a game before is gone. But this is the hand-holding that still remains. Having your hand held through a linear path through the whole game and being given really no opportunities to have your own personal experiences. I've talked about a similar thing in a previous video. It's this one. You should check it out. It's very good. It will help you understand a little bit better why I'm saying this and why I think this is such a big deal. Alright, let's get back onto the good stuff. The Pokemon designs. I just really love almost all of the Pokemon that were introduced in this generation. I think from a design perspective, most of them are pretty great. I've talked a lot about Pokemon design and my opinions on it in the black and white video, and something that I kind of touched on but I don't feel like I really fully explained in that video is how much I appreciate and how important I think leitmotifs are in Pokemon design. It's cool for a Pokemon to be based off of an animal, but that's not really enough. That doesn't make it charming or appealing or easy to get attached to, and that's my problem with a lot of Generation 5 designs. Ducklet is just a duck. Beartic is just a polar bear with like a weird thing around his face. Cryogonal is just a snowflake, apparently. Thankfully, there's little to none of that here in Generation 8. Almost every Pokemon has a concept at play that is clearly communicated through its design. My favourite Pokemon of this new generation is Grapploct. Look at my boy, he's beautiful, he's gorgeous, he's perfect. He's a wrestling octopus. I named mine Octagon Jr. Shoutouts to AEW, the fans will get the joke. I liked Applin and both of his evolutions and the kind of apple dragon thing they've got going on, even if his evolution method was a bit stupid and obtuse. Toxicity is like this kind of poison electric toad guy who's like bipedal, but he's got like a punk rock kind of leitmotif going on as well, and his ability means that any attacks that relate to sound do more damage, and he takes less damage from sound attacks. There's so much cool, nice, neat little stuff like this, and I think there's a lot of cool little theming and leitmotifs and references to UK culture that are going to go underappreciated. Mr. Rhyme, for example, clearly based off of Charlie Chaplin. Nick It, I mean, it's called Nick It because nick is like a colloquialism in England for stealing something. If you steal something, you nick it, right? Just a nice lot of cool, neat little stuff like this. I love the Pokemon in Galar. I had no problem building a team. Clearly, a lot of people felt the same way. Really, the only problem is those starter evolutions. Oh boy, what happened to you guys? I've seen a startling amount of people who just don't have their fully evolved starters in their parties because, damn, you guys got hit with the ugly stick. Either way, Pokemon designs in Generation 8, big thumbs up from me. Right, the next big problem with these games, however, is in a lot of ways its presentation. Earlier I said that these were the most unpolished Pokemon games ever released, and this is why. A lot has been made of the way that the game looks, and people have been saying it looks awful. I don't know if it's accurate to say that the games look bad or awful, so much as it would be accurate to say that across the board, Pokemon Sword and Shield just doesn't look as good as it should, especially if you compare it to its contemporary JRPGs. It is just not up to par. There are some parts of the game that look gorgeous, but there are some parts of the game, one of them in particular that we'll be getting to very soon, that just doesn't look too great, does it? Textures are off and they look pretty low quality. A lot of the shading on the Pokemon models does not do the designs justice. A lot of the Pokemon models in this game just look like they were put in MS Paint and someone got the paint can and just splashed one color on them. It's not just art and graphics though, it's animations. Again, some animations in the game look great, especially Dynamax and Gigantamax moves and pretty much all of the moves that Zacian and Zamazenta use, but then some of the stuff that Zacian and Zamazenta do does not look great. Check out this little clip of one of the legendaries just turning around on the spot. Oh, that looks nasty. The world around you freezes when you use a ladder in the overworld. There's pretty bad draw distance. The world around you isn't seamless. Things just kind of pop into existence when you get close enough and pop out of existence when you get far away enough. Not having voice acting doesn't really bother me, but if you're not going to have voice acting, maybe don't make a gym leader who's a rock star, whose whole gimmick is that he's singing throughout the whole battle, because it looks really cheap. A lot of things about this game come off quite cheap and quite undercooked, but I do kind of want to consider why that may be, because I've compared Pokemon to its contemporary JRPGs, and I'm going to be doing that a little bit more in a little bit. But before we do that, I just want to say that it doesn't get talked about enough how different Pokemon's development cycle is compared to those other games. Games like Dragon Quest XI and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, they get a lot more time in the oven than Pokemon does, because Pokemon is one of the biggest media franchises in the world. They've got to the point now where a new main series Pokemon game basically has to come out every 3 years, because there's an anime that's going to be ending and needs to transition into its new season. They're not just going to take Pokemon off the air for a while. It'd be cool if they did and gave a game a lot more time to get ready, but they're not going to do that because business and capitalism. There's merchandise that needs to come out, right? There's all this stuff that needs to change, so there's probably quite the crunch on Pokemon games. When you consider that with the fact that this is the first time it ever got released on a home console, the fact that Game Freak had also been working on Little Town Hero, I'm not saying that this completely excuses how unfinished Sword and Shield came out seeming, but I'm saying that this might be a reason why this happened, and maybe a little bit of understanding is required. I'm not going to bash these games and say they look awful and say that it's inexcusable. They don't look great, they're not presented very well, they do deserve criticism for that, but they also deserve, I think, just a little bit of understanding. That's my stance. However, there is an addendum to be added here, because in the lead up to the release, I believe that someone representing Game Freak, I'll have to look for the sources, at some point effectively said that part of the reason that a lot of the Pokemon from the national decks had been cut for Sword and Shield is because they were spending time working on new models or animations. And since then, evidence has come out to suggest that all of the models are in fact reused from previous games, which would mean that they lied. If that is the case, I'm not saying that is the case, but evidence seems to point towards it. If that is the case, that is inexcusable. Not having entirely new models, but lying to your consumers is not okay. Maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. We'll kind of have to wait and see on that one. Seemingly in spite of its own, in my opinion, extremely unnecessary linearity, Sword and Shield, surprisingly, I think has actually got really good pacing, and that might sound weird to hear me say after everything I've already said, but there's a huge gap between the start of the game and the first gym, and then between all of the 8 gyms you spend about the same amount of time, give or take. And I would like it if the game slowed down a bit and allowed for some exploration, or for you to discover things and do things on your own time, and I think a good pacing could still be achieved with that, so I don't think the pacing is perfect, but it is nice and consistent. I know that I criticised Generation 6 for having weird pacing, where there was a huge gap between the first and second gym, and then they just kind of came at you really fast one after another, but that's because it was weirdly inconsistent, right? Why is there such a huge gap between the first and second gym, and then like no gap at all between the rest of them? But in this game, it makes a lot more sense, I think, to have a big gap between the beginning and the first gym, and then to do every gym after in reasonably quick succession. And the cool thing about this game is that even after you're done with the 8th gym, there's actually still a lot to go left. You still have the whole city of Wyndon and the whole Championship Cup thing, and I've got to say that the way that gyms and the whole Championship Cup thing is handled in this game, I think is excellent. It makes gyms feel like a genuinely big deal. It makes them feel like a real goal to strive for, which does help the pacing in part. And I think the game's climax and closing few hours, while they have a few issues, are actually really quite fun and engaging, because there's so much gravitas given to the goal that you're trying to achieve. It feels like there's stakes, it feels like there's genuine drama in what you're involved in, and the battles feel tense and they feel grand, and I don't think that the closing few hours of a Pokemon game have ever felt this earned, if that makes sense. It feels legit, it really does feel like a big deal, and I can't praise that enough. Despite its linearity, Pokemon Sword and Shield, in my opinion, somehow still achieves very good pacing, and I actually, like I say, I really love the closing few hours of this game. I love the final battle, I love the last few battles, because they're given a sense of legitimate weight. Now then, the wild area. If there's one thing you can't criticize about the wild area, it's that name. There are definitely some things about this area that I would describe as wild. Look at those textures. Look at all the Pokemon popping in and out of existence. Look at how the weather changes every 5 yards that I travel. If you're looking for references to British culture, then hear me out. The wild area is not so much a seamless area with random Pokemon encounters, so much as it is quite a lot like the Honeycomb Maze game from Takeshi's Castle. Every 5 yards that you travel is pretty much equivalent to a contestant on the show slowly and anxiously opening the door to see if there's a level 60 Haxorus in there. There's only one way to find out. The wild area in concept is an A+. This is something that Pokemon really needs. In execution, it's it's not an A+. Yeah, again, this is another example where you can see just how far behind Pokemon is in comparison to its other JRPGs. Other games like Dragon Quest XI and Xenoblade Chronicles, they've been doing this big sprawling overworld with visible enemies for years now, right? Pokemon is so far behind and it needs to catch up, right? This popping in and out of existence stuff, randomly bumping into stuff that previously wasn't visible like a second ago. It's not good. It's not natural. The wild area, I like the idea of it. I really do. I don't know if I'd even say it really incentivizes exploration. It kind of does. Like there's some TMs and some items and a couple of NPCs hanging around. Not really enough to call it good, and certainly not enough to justify the linearity of the rest of the game. If people are going to say the rest of the game is linear because you have the wild area to explore, I'd find that quite ridiculous. I really hope they try it again though. I hope they bring back the wild area in a future game and make it good. Because if it's done well, it could single-handedly make a Pokemon game really, really good. It has so much potential. It is funny though. It's really funny. Quality of life changes. Let's talk about them. The move deleter, the move relearner, the name rater, the Pokemon all being in the Pokemon Center. Sick. I love it. Being able to access your boxes from anywhere in the game. Sick. I love it. Mints that change a Pokemon's nature. Max raid battles, which are pretty fun. I quite like them. That allow you to catch Pokemon with lots of max IVs, making breeding such a more streamlined process. Being able to use much more supplements like protein and Carbos on your Pokemon to max out EV. Pretty much eliminating EV training. Experience candies. So many great changes were made in this game to make everyone's lives easier, and you have to appreciate that. There's a ton of little design decisions made in this game that aid players' quality of life, and that really does deserve praise. The final big issue that I draw with this game is the post-game. I think the post-game's pretty lame. There are these two new guys who pop up called Swordwood and Shieldbert, who are pretty funny. I kind of like them, but the post-game basically just has you battling them a couple times, doing 8 max raid battles or so in a row, and then you get Zacian or Zamazenta in there somewhere and battle hop again. You know, not really much to write home about, nothing special, pretty lame all things considered. Although a weird little touch, I actually really do like that you don't get the box legendary until after the main game. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I thought it played a big part in making Leon much harder, even if you do have Eternatus, and also just makes the moment feel a lot more special in my opinion. So I'm kind of done with all the things that I feel like I can outright call good or bad, and now there's a few things I want to say about the game that kind of don't really fall into either category. So I want to talk about Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing. I was very down on this heading into the game. To me, it looked like another silly gimmick, another single generation battle gimmick that they would introduce in this generation and then throw away in the next, and they are probably still going to do that. And as far as competitive play is concerned, it's too early to say anything for sure, but right now Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing seems very stupid. It's probably going to be banned eventually. It's a bit much. However, I will at the very least say that in the game's main story, it actually really does work. Your opponents Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing their Pokemon helps make those battles feel so much more grand. This is a big part of the reason that I like the gym leader battles so much more in this game, because you've got these huge Pokemon that Dynamax and they present an interesting challenge, and you've got the crowd chant noises put in the game, which is a really cool little touch to touch on kind of UK football stadium culture. I do lament that a large majority of existing Pokemon that were given Dynamax forms were Generation 1. Sure, the nostalgia baiting in Sword and Shield is nowhere near as bad as it's been for the past 2 generations, generations, but I am still tired of Charizard, I'm tired of Pikachu, tired of Eevee, tired of Meowth. Can you all go away, please? Like, Garbodor got a Gigantamax form, and I think he might be the only non-Gen 1 and Gen 8 Pokemon to have gotten a Gigantamax form. I might be wrong, but he's one of the only ones. And I am at least glad that they actually gave some of the new Pokemon Gigantamax forms, though, unlike Megas when they were introduced. Galarian forms are pretty much the same. Most of them were given to Gen 1 Pokemon, which kind of annoys me, but at least it wasn't all given to Gen 1 Pokemon like it was with Alolan forms, so there's that. The story and the characters, I've heard people complaining quite a lot about the characters, saying that these are the worst characters ever in a main series Pokemon game. Like, did you play Generation 6? I made a whole ton of jokes about them being pieces of furniture in my video, but they really were awful characters. And I mean, these characters in this game, they have character arcs, speed changes throughout the game, hop changes throughout the game. They're fine, they're not amazing, but they're certainly not awful. They didn't bog the game down for me. I do think you see a bit too much of them. I definitely think you battle hop way too much in this game. There are way too many rival battles. The soundtrack is eclectic, to say the least. This is kind of a continuation of the presentation, because some of the soundtrack just sounds bad, man. It sounds undercooked and unfinished and incredibly generic, like the theme that plays when you talk to the professor and a lot of the early game towns and stuff. And then somewhat randomly, there are just some complete bangers in this game, like the Battle Tower theme, the gym battle theme. I really like Marnie's battle theme. The region of Galar, just as eclectic. Some of it was really great. I love the towns and cities in this game. I love the obvious references to UK culture like Hammerlock and Wyndon. I think they're pulled off really well. Generally, I think the cities and towns in this game are very nice, but the routes and the other areas, obviously I've already talked about the wild area, but this game's region does not make a lot of geographical sense. I have no idea how Wyndon is supposed to be connected to Route 10 when it's like completely frozen over. It feels like the weather is changing dramatically everywhere you go, and I don't at all get how Badonlea and Glimmer Tangle are connected to Stow-on-Side, which is like this sandy desert town. Yeah, geographically it's very inconsistent. I don't hate it, I don't love it either. I don't think it's great. Man, I think that's about all I have to say really on the games and my experience playing them. There's nothing else I can really think of that really affected my enjoyment either way. It's a very mixed bag, but I'm almost frustrated to say that at the end of the day, I really did enjoy these games. They do have a lot of problems, things that are deserving of criticism, but they also answered and solved a lot of problems. They solved the problem of the experience share, in my opinion. I don't know, is that controversial? I've seen some people saying they still thought the games are way too easy, and you know what I'm like? I'm a real critic of that kind of thing, and I actually really thought it was quite a lot better this time around. I don't know if that's just me, maybe I'm alone in that, but I really felt like the experience was handled quite well in this game, although as I've said, not having the option to turn it off is just stupid. I went into these games honestly kind of ready to hate them because I've grown so tired of the formula, and I am still somewhat tired of the formula. I think Pokemon might be the series, it might be the #1 series that has the most wasted potential in the world. You can see that with stuff like the wild area. Like, it's frustrating that they've created this rich world with so many fascinating creatures and so many fascinating things about it, and there's so much we could be doing in this world, and 8 generations in a row we've been a 10-year-old kid from a small town who picks one starter Pokemon, which is either water, grass or fire, from a professor who is named after a tree, and we always have a rival, and there's always a regional rodent and a regional bird, and there's always some stupid evil team, and there's always a legendary Pokemon. And I just think it's so frustrating that there's so much potential for this world, and for 8 generations we've done the same thing. And this is why a lot of the time I really enjoy the Pokemon spin-offs like Colosseum and XD that feel like they explore different parts of this world and you take on different roles. I wanted to rant about this, I wanted to complain about this, about how formulaic this is, and I kind of am. I am still frustrated by the formula, but I'm somehow more frustrated that after 8 generations I still quite enjoyed Sword and Shield. I don't really know where I stand on the future of the games. If Generation 9 seems like it's gonna do more of the same stuff and more of the formula, then no matter how many problems it fixes, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be interested in playing it. I do know this, the Pokemon series has had a tight grip on my dick for years now. I have played way too many of these games, and I was convinced that Sword and Shield will be the point where I finally say, no, I'm gonna cut my dick off. Get your hands off my balls, Pokemon. But no. I wound up shockingly liking these games a lot more than I thought I would. I would probably put them even slightly above X and Y. I think this is the most unbridled fun I've had with a Pokemon game in years. Maybe since Generation 4, maybe even on par. They're flawed, but they're very enjoyable. If there's one thing I can say about Pokemon Sword and Shield, it's that Pokemon Sword and Shield have kept my penis intact. So there it is. As always, as you can imagine, this video took a lot of time and effort, and I tried to get it out as fast as I could to try and kind of capitalize on the newness of the game. Your support means the world to me. Subscriptions and comments and shares and all that stuff, because I'm a small time channel at the moment. I'm one guy with a laptop and I do all this and I work really hard, and I like to think that my stuff is worth more than view counts and subscriber counts would show, and maybe in time I'll get to where I want to be. In the meantime, I'd love it if you could help me get there. That was Pokemon Sword and Shield: The Verdict, and I'll see you again soon. Congratulations, Pokemon, you got me again, bastards.